Okay, so the first thing I'd like for us to do before we get going with any sort of cool project is do a very quick crash course over Unity.
Okay.
So Zach, here we are with Unity up. Now you've installed the 2.6 version.
I have.
That's now been released that anyone can go out and grab for free. And you've
Just
set
this
it up.
morning.
Okay. Now I've got the professional version that I'm using here. So there are some subtle changes here and there. But let me ask you, when you launched yours, how did it come up?
Well, I only saw one picture of the islands on the left-hand side.
Okay, so you did indeed get the island.
I did get the island.
Okay, so let's talk about the island real quick. So the island is a demo, it's a tech demo of what can be done with Unity. And of course, it's a first-person shooter type game, not a full game, but enough in which you can run around inside this environment and you can see things that come to life. And
It's an interactive environment.
It is, without a doubt. So that opens up automatically so that you can, scroll through the different assets and you can kind of pick apart what they've put together to give you an idea about how games in Unity are put together. And that's very cool. So I wanted to make sure that that did indeed come up.
Yep.
Okay, so anything else different than what you're seeing right here on
Like I
this
said,
screen?
I only saw one picture. You see, like right now, you've got two images that show the island from two different angles.
Okay.
I only got one of them.
Okay, so we're going to talk about these panels here in just a second. I just wanted to get a real quick feel, just for those of you out there that are watching the video, just to let everyone know, when we record videos over here at 3DBuzz, everything is, well, unscripted, so we're kind of shooting from the hip here, which means I may forget to ask Zach questions from time to time, such as, so what did Unity look like these days when you open it up? Because I've been using mine for quite some time now.
Yeah, and it looked like a totally different app.
Well, it's good to hear that it doesn't look completely different. But that does bring us to the key thing that I would like to point out as we start our little crash course. And that is Unity, in my opinion, is one of the most simplistic editors I have ever seen. It really divides up into three key parts. Those parts are, first, of course, across the top, we've got a menu bar. And before I go any further, let me take 1 second and say this. For those of you out there watching the video, a lot of you may be familiar with 3DBuzz style videos. And with applications, we generally spend a good deal of time going over pretty much every feature available on a user interface. That is not how we're going to approach this series. This is going to be one of those, we'll learn it as we need it, just so that we can really push forward into the cool stuff.
Okay.
So we've got a menu bar across the top. Up underneath that, we have a toolbar with only a handful of options available under.
There's not much to click on the toolbar.
And then up underneath that, we have a series of panels. So when I say we've got three key areas, that's it. We just have the menu bar, toolbar, and panels. Now with panels, there are several different kinds of panels that we will be working with, and we're going to be focusing on 6 of them. There are some others that we will talk about later in time, but for now, these 6 panels are going to be very important to us.
Okay, so what are these 6 panels?
Well, if we come up here and we click on Window, we can quickly see right here a bunch of panel names. We've got Scene, we've got Game, we've got Inspector, we've got Hierarchy, Project, Animation, and Profiler. And then Asset Server is something different, which we'll get to spend a little bit of time talking about later. And finally, at the bottom, we've got the console. So these panels, you can see docked all around the user interface here, provide a way for us to work with different types of content within Unity. And what I mean by that is, let's take our scene panel, for example. The content in which we are working with here is the full composition of our 3D environment that we have put together. So in this case, if I was to come over here and hold Alt down and just left click and kind of drag around, we can see that we've got lights, we've got terrain, we've got trees and water. So again, we're just using this particular panel to look into the world in which we are creating. So obviously we're going to be working inside of our scene panel often. We're not limited to working with a perspective view only, as we see right now. We can come up here to the scene gizmo in the upper right hand corner, and we can quickly switch over to other views. If I was to take this and rotate it around so that we have positive X pointing off to the left and Z pointing forward, if I wanted to quickly switch over, let's say, to a right view or to a left view, or over to a front view, or even a top view. You'll notice how I'm using my axes here to navigate to that particular view quickly.
And in that one bit where we actually saw the island when it rotated around, you can kind of feel things flatten out as they would with an orthographic view.
Absolutely. Those are indeed orthogonal views. So again, scene view, we're going to be working with it quite a bit. And as we begin working with it, there will be times that we'll need to start working with some of the different options that are available to us within the view. And that's when we'll come in here and we'll start talking about these specific options.
Sure.
So moving down from there, we've got what is known as the game panel. The game panel is going to give you a representation of your final product. So right now, looking down here, what we're seeing is where we're going to kick things off for the game. When I hit play, we're seeing our final rendered representation of the game as we have it now.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and hit play. Let's take a look at this. So look at this. Boom, everything comes to life. I can now start looking around as if I was in a typical first-person shooter. I can also use my WASD keys, and I can strafe left and right. I can walk forward. So fast, too. I'm actually having to drag the mouse very slowly here. Look around. Look at that. We've got animations taking place. So we have these birds flying. We've got ambient sounds. We've got the water. It has motion on it.
Even it looks like the foliage is moving a little bit.
Absolutely. Everything is just simply, you can see the tree swaying there. Everything's just come to life. But that's the key here. What we're looking at is the game in motion.
This is what the player would see.
That's right. So even if we were to go as far as to create a series of menus and we had scores, everything, we'd get to see all of that right here. This is very convenient because I can just hit Control P to start and stop our playback mode for the game. That's so much more convenient than coming in every time we want to test something and having to rebuild the game every single time. Much more convenient.
Now, I'm a creature of analogy, and I do come into this from working with a lot of 3D apps like 3ds Max and Maya, and it looks like the real key difference between these two panels is where your scene view, your scene panel, that's going to be a lot like your perspective view in most 3D apps. And
it's going to be like your typical viewports.
Right.
Where you're looking at your final rendered image down here in the game.
Right. Your game panel is going to be like whatever your in-scene camera would see.
That's right.
So you're the director in the top view, you're the player in the bottom view.
And we are indeed looking through a camera. You have to have a camera in which you're going to capture imagery that your player is going to see when playing your game. So that's very important. And we'll talk more about cameras a little bit later.
Okay.
All right, so there's two of the panels. So let's go ahead and move over here to the right-hand side. We've got three panels over here. These guys are all related to assets and game objects that are in the game and properties that we will be working with on the content itself. In the next video, we're going to spend just a few minutes and we're going to talk about game objects. Everything that you see over here inside of our scene is a game object. Game object at its core is just a simple base foundation that we can add components to. And we can make cameras out of them, lights out of them. We can have terrain. The list goes on and on. But if we have something that is over here inside our scene, it is a game object, and we get all of those guys listed here in the hierarchy. So what I'm saying is right now, everything that exists over here in the scene exists here in the hierarchy. Okay. Now, below, we have project. Project's different. Project shows us all of the assets that are available for us to use in our game or in a scene. Okay, it does not mean that every asset that we have brought in is indeed in the game. Okay, there are things that exist over here in our project panel that are sitting there as prefabs, which is something we'll discuss a little bit later, but they're sitting there as these packaged prefabs that will be instantiated when the game runs, and that particular object needs to come into existence.
Okay.
For example, if we had a spaceship that's flying along and that spaceship has a weapon and the user hits the spacebar to fire off that weapon, projectiles, they've got to come from somewhere. And
lasers.
Exactly. So projectiles may sit as a prefab down in the project area where it doesn't actually exist in the game, but then when the user presses the fire button, that prefab is instantiated and a game object comes into existence in the world, and then we can control that game object.
So hierarchy is going to show you the objects that exist in the game as of this exact moment.
That's right.
Does that mean it's going to change while we play the game?
Absolutely. As I was just saying, the spaceship example, as we're firing, we're instantiating all of the prefabs, the bullets or projectiles. If we hit play right now and launch the game again, look over here. Take a look at, we can see things that are coming into existence and going out of existence. And so there is just a quick example. Now we're going to see this in a much cleaner state a little bit later on when we put together our own simple game. But you're absolutely right.
So the hierarchy panel's a list of everything that's in the game right now, where the project panel is kind of like a library of everything that could potentially be in the game at some point.
Exactly. And to drive that home a little bit better, let's go ahead and bring a folder over here. All right. When you create a project in Unity, all you're really creating is a root folder. And then when the project is created, you get a couple folders that are created within the root folder. And here's what I'm saying. Let's say that we were creating this game and we called it Island Demo. So we would have said, create a new project, and it would have asked us where do we want to put the project and what name do we want to give it. So let's say that we'd put it under Unity Projects, and we called the project Island Demo. To make that, all we would have needed to do was create a folder called Island Demo and select it and say that's our project. And then Unity is going to come in and we're going to end up with an assets folder and a library folder. And there are some other things that we'll see under certain conditions, such as temp or Visual Studio solution files if you're working with Visual Solutions, or excuse me, Visual Studio.
Right.
But we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's so many things to, I hate saying that we'll talk about it later, but there are so many things to touch on. And if we were to talk about every single thing, this would turn into a monster of a video.
It's easy to stray off the main path.
Absolutely. So the thing I want to point out by bringing up this folder here is the assets folder. So if we take a look down here in our project panel, everything that we have down here is what exists inside of our assets folder. So let's go ahead and jump into assets, and I can prove it real quick. So we have airplane ruins, birds, bridges, and you can see the list go on and on. And if we were to scroll down a little bit further, we also have some assets in here, prefab, scene file, a PSD file. And if we were to scroll down over here, we could also find these guys that are sitting out at the root themselves. So if we were to come and start closing things up, there's that islands file that's not actually in a folder. So the folders that we have back here inside our actual folder structure are represented as folders in here. And we'll be creating folders in here later. Just keep in mind, as we're doing that, we're actually creating folders behind the scenes for real in the directory structure.
So in the end, the projects panel is really just allowing you to browse and dig through an actual folder structure in your OS.
Exactly. But there's a lot of power that comes with this panel right here. When I drag and drop audio files or textures into the projects panel, there's importing that takes place. You know, there may be some texture compression that takes place.
Right.
So there's some other things that are happening that's going to benefit us by bringing these assets in. So it's not like just we're dragging a particular file over to a folder inside our assets.
Right. And one of the reasons this is so interesting when you point it out is, again, I come into this from a different background. You know, I come into this from 3D animation. I've also worked with other game engines where assets are packaged up into kind of a particular type of file. So, and when you try to go into your OS, you'll only see this very specific type of file. You won't actually see a folder structure that exactly reflects what you see inside the editor itself.
Right.
Things get compressed down into a proprietary format.
Exactly.
And here you don't have that. Here you have something that's literally reaching into the exact same folder structure you would get if you navigated to it inside of Windows or Mac OS.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, for example, with our airplane runes right here, if we were to jump into the FBX models, look at that. We're actually looking at the FBX models right there. If we come back over here and we were to open up our airplane runes, there's FBX, open it up, and there's our models, in which we could take and drag them straight into the scene or up here into the hierarchy and make that object now exist in the game in this particular scene. Okay, so with these two guys out of the way, And we'll be working with these a lot. We're going to talk later on. I mean, you see up here how we've got these collapsible objects, but everything's supposed to be a game object. But the question is, what are these guys that can be collapsed? Well, all we're looking at are game objects that have been parented. We've just created hierarchy. So that's all you're looking at here is a root level game object, and then we have other game objects that have been parented to this guy.
Gotcha.
So a bit different than the folder structure that we see down here in Project. Now you'll notice that as I have been clicking on things in both the hierarchy panel and down here in the project panel, over here on the right-hand side, the inspector has been coming to life. What the inspector does is it shows us the properties of a selected game object or of an asset. So if I was to come over here and select a PSD file, you'll notice I've got all sorts of information that comes in regards to are maps being generated, what kind of filtering are we going to use.
Looks like you even get a sample of it, yeah.
Yep, so there's a lot of things that's taken place. Or if I was to dig down, just one more example, let's see, scripts. If I was to look at scripts, it's going to fill this guy out with as much as it can show us from a script until we get to a point where it's going to say etc., in which you'll need to go into an editor, which we'll be looking at here very shortly. Sounds, so if we were to jump in here and take a look at some of the sounds, look at that.
Oh, nice. You get a waveform.
Yep, and the ability to play it. And it's very powerful, but it's very straightforward and simple, and I really, really like that. So
context sensitive, that'd be a big word to throw
absolutely.
out for that guy.
So the inspector is simply going to show you the properties of the object that you have selected. So I come in here, well, object, asset, or let's go ahead and throw one more thing in there, because up here we're looking at game objects. And so we see game object and we see any components that have been attached.
Sure.
Down here we're looking at properties from the particular asset. We can also come up here, let's say to edit, come down to project settings, and let me pick on player. Now we're looking at player settings for the game. When we go to actually build our final game here, these guys are going to be taken into account. Things like the default screen width and height, etc.
So these are properties for the editor itself?
Yeah, properties for the player for the game.
Okay.
So the inspector is going to show you properties for pretty much anything that you select, be it an asset, be it a game object, etc.
Okay.
Okay. And then, of course, as soon as we select back on something here, it's going to light up over on the right-hand side and jump back to those particular properties.
Very cool.
So, again, keeping things nice and simple. When working inside of Unity, you're going to find yourself working in these panels. The panels break down into very simple and concise categories, with working inside our scene, looking at a representation of our game in action and testing it out without leaving the editor, seeing all of the game objects and the hierarchical relationships between those game objects, seeing all assets available to us, as well as taking a look at all of the properties that are available for us to manipulate on a given object that has been selected. There's one more panel that at the moment I've got it over here on my left side monitor. Let me make sure he makes a very quick appearance, and that is our console. And the console is a very, very helpful panel. Once we begin creating scripts, this guy right here is going to be available to us where we can debug information out. We can log information out to here so that we can keep an eye on what's taking place under the hood. Also, as we run into problems that will generate warnings or errors, we will also see those in the console. We'll also get a flash of it down here at the bottom. So the last thing that gets printed out or the last warning will simply sit down here until it gets cleared. But over here in the console, you can generally select on the error or whatever it may be and get additional details down here at the bottom. And we'll get to see this quite a bit in the project that's coming up, because we'll use this for debugging some of the things that we're going to be putting together. So with that, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about at this stage of the game. Again, quick crash course. Just make sure to understand that we're dealing with panels, toolbar, and a menu bar, and we're working with game objects. It's that simple. So any other questions?
No, I think I'm with you so far, man.
Okay, as we dig deeper and deeper into our own game, everything here is going to just really start to solidify. So with that, that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot, guys.